In a small Missouri town called Haven Ridge, where change moved slower than cornfields swayed, a single act of decency altered everything. Gideon Blake, a quiet widower with calloused hands and kind eyes, was a man of routine. Every Saturday morning, he arrived at the local farmer's market just as the sun crested the grain silos, setting up his apple crates with practiced care. His produce, drawn from the trees his father had planted, was always perfectly arranged, and he always wore the same faded denim shirt with sleeves rolled high. Gideon spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. Not because he raised his voice, he never had to, but because he chose his words like he chose apples, carefully, with a quiet reverence. That morning, the market buzzed with life. The scent of cinnamon donuts mixed with early peaches. Old men in straw hats chuckled under striped awnings. The clink of jars, the shuffle of boots on gravel, the drone of gossip. It was the heartbeat of Haven Ridge. But something cut through that pleasant drone. A man's voice, sharp and unkind. Useless. I told you to stop following me. You and your broken little girl. Go beg someone else for pity. The words struck like lightning through the warm air. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Mara Lindley stood trembling, shielding her daughter, Hazel, from the verbal blows. Hazel, just 8, sat silently in a battered wheelchair, her small frame dwarfed by its size. Her hands clutched her mother's like lifelines. Her legs, too thin and unmoving, stayed motionless as the man who had once promised Mara forever now hurled his final rejection in public. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Gideon did. He crossed the path slowly, boots crunching gravel. The silence of his approach was louder than any shout. He knelt before Hazel first. From his back pocket, he pulled a worn cloth and gently dabbed a tear from her cheek. She flinched, then saw his eyes, gray, kind, steady. He turned to the man, who had folded his arms like a shield of pride. "This isn't your business," the man said. "You made it everyone's the moment you humiliated a child in front of half the county," Gideon replied. His voice was low, but the weight of it fell like iron. "You shamed a child who's done nothing but sit in a chair. That's not just cruel. That's cowardice." The man tried to sneer, but the crowd was no longer on his side. Gideon continued, "My daughter couldn't walk either. She taught me more from a wheelchair than I learned standing my whole life. And she never once needed legs to move hearts." Silence swelled again. Not awkward, charged. The man scoffed. "I've done enough." "Yeah," Gideon said. "Damage, mostly." The man turned and walked away. No one stopped him. No one watched him go. Then something happened. People moved. A grocer handed Mara a bag of fruit. A woman draped a jacket over Hazel's lap. An old veteran placed a hand on Gideon's shoulder. Mara whispered a shaky, "Thank you." Gideon bent beside Hazel. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded faintly. He looked at Mara. "You got a place?" She hesitated. "Not really." He nodded. "I've got a place. Not fancy, but quiet. There's a tree. I think it's magic." Hazel looked up. "Magic? Maybe not really," Gideon said. "But it's old, strong, and it waits." That's how it began. Not with a contract, not with a plan. With a ride in an old truck, a girl with a sketchbook, a mother clutching fear and hope in equal measure, and a man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to a soul in weeks, suddenly saying, "Let's go home." The road to Gideon Blake's farmhouse curled like a ribbon through fields of golden wheat and open sky. Mara sat stiff in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around Hazel like she was something breakable. Hazel herself was quiet but curious, her eyes wide and alert, taking in every barn and broken fence post as if they might whisper their stories to her. The truck rattled and creaked, each bump in the road a reminder of how far from certainty they were. Gideon didn't speak. He kept his eyes forward, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the cracked window ledge. But the silence wasn't cold. It was something else, something like space. Space to breathe. Space to begin. When they turned onto a gravel driveway lined with faded white fence posts, Mara caught her breath. The farmhouse at the end wasn't grand. Its wood siding had grayed with time. The porch sagged, but it stood. And out back, just visible beyond a weathered red shed, was the tree. Hazel saw it first. A great apple tree with limbs like outstretched arms, its canopy a thick umbrella of green. Sunlight danced through its leaves, speckling the ground in gold. Hazel gasped. "It looks like something out of a picture." Gideon smiled faintly. "My dad planted it the day he brought my mom home, said every house needs something strong to grow beside." He pulled the truck to a stop. "We'll make do," he said quietly, almost to himself. Mara helped Hazel into her chair with practiced care. Gideon moved ahead and unlocked the front door with a heavy iron key. The hinges groaned as the door swung open. "House is old," he said. "Kitchen's on the right. Guest rooms through the back, near the stove. Gets afternoon sun." Mara nodded, unsure what else to say. She expected strings, expected a catch, but none came. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and apples. It was sparse, but clean. A photo of a smiling girl holding a harmonica sat on the mantel. Mara didn't ask. She didn't need to. Grief, after all, had a language of its own. Hazel wheeled herself into the guest room, eyes lighting up at the small window overlooking the shed and the tree. "Can we sit out there later?" she asked. Gideon nodded. Of course. They spent that first evening under the tree. Gideon carried Hazel's chair across the uneven lawn like it was sacred. He placed it just right, in a patch of filtered light. The air was warm and still. "It's beautiful," Hazel whispered. Gideon sat on the old wooden chair beneath the tree. It creaked, but held firm. "My daughter used to sit here with me," he said. Every evening, Hazel turned to him. "What was her name?" "Laya," he said, barely louder than the wind. The silence that followed wasn't sad. It was reverent. That night, Mara cooked scrambled eggs and toast. Hazel handed forks to Gideon with a solemn sense of duty. Afterward, they sat quietly, while the wind moved through the leaves outside. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't stopped today," Mara said softly. Gideon looked at her and said, "I didn't stop. You did. You just needed someone to open the door." Under the tree, the old chair rocked slightly in the breeze. Not empty, not waiting, just ready. The next morning arrived with the low murmur of wind and the chirp of distant birds. Inside Gideon's farmhouse, the light filtered in slow and golden through the gauzy curtains. Mara stirred first, unsure for a moment of where she was. Then she saw Hazel asleep on the bed next to her, one hand still curled around the edge of her sketchbook, and remembered. Gideon was already up. She heard the soft clatter of dishes and the whistle of the kettle from the kitchen. When she stepped out, still in borrowed flannel, she found him placing 3 mugs on the table, 2 full of coffee and 1 with warm apple cider. "I didn't know how you take it," he said, gesturing to the coffee. "Like this," she replied. "Grateful." Hazel wheeled herself into the room not long after, her hair sticking up in every direction. Gideon didn't laugh. He just poured her cider and handed her a folded napkin with a single word scribbled in ballpoint pen. "Welcome." Breakfast was quiet, but not strained. They ate toast and jam and sliced apples while the wind nudged the chimes outside. There were no interrogations, no awkward pleasantries, just presence. After they finished, Hazel asked, "Can we go sit by the tree again?" Gideon nodded. "Let me get the blanket." Out beneath the apple tree, the morning felt different. Brighter, like something new had taken root overnight. Hazel sketched, while Mara read aloud from an old book she found on the shelf. Gideon sat in his chair, eyes closed, listening. Not to the words, but to the rhythm. The harmony of voices he hadn't known he missed until they were there. When Mara paused, Hazel looked up. "What happened to her?" she asked, pointing subtly to the harmonica on the mantel they'd seen the night before. Gideon opened his eyes. "Laya?" He took a breath. "She was 8, just like you. Spinal muscular. Atrophy!" Mara's face softened with shared understanding. Hazel blinked slowly. "Did it hurt?" Gideon shook his head. "Not her. Not much. But me? Every day since." There was no need for more words. The truth, simple and bare, hung between them. Later, that day, Mara found Hazel's sketch of the tree, 3 figures beneath it. One in a chair, one standing, one on the ground, legs crossed. The lines weren't perfect, but the message was clear. This was a place where they belonged. And for the first time in years, Gideon brought out Laya's harmonica and placed it gently on the windowsill. The house, it seemed, had stopped holding its breath. Hazel had a ritual by their 3rd day in Gideon's home. Every morning, after her mother brushed her hair and wheeled her out into the gentle morning light, Hazel asked for her sketchbook. She never said much, just asked to be near the apple tree and began drawing. Gideon had started leaving a folded quilt beneath the branches, along with a small crate turned upside down to serve as a makeshift table. On the 4th morning, he brought out an extra pillow, too. "To keep the roots from poking through," he said. Hazel just smiled. Mara had started to breathe differently, too. She spent time in the kitchen, humming softly, the sound unfamiliar but comforting. At night, she washed dishes while Gideon dried. She laughed once at one of his quiet jokes. It had startled them both. Gideon started noticing things, like how Hazel's drawings captured more than just shapes. They held feeling. In one, she sketched the apple tree, its roots tangled around hearts instead of rocks. In another, she drew 3 chairs beneath the tree, one for each of them. He tacked that one to the fridge. That evening, as the sun tipped low and bathed the yard in gold, Gideon carried Hazel out again. She looked up through the branches and whispered, "It feels like it's learning our names." Gideon paused. "The tree?" Hazel nodded. "It didn't say them out loud, but it knows." He didn't laugh. Not because he believed trees spoke, but because he believed Hazel did. Later that night, when Mara stepped out onto the porch, she found Gideon beneath the tree, tuning an old harmonica that had sat untouched in a drawer for 2 years. "Haven't played since—" "You don't have to explain," Mara said. "But if you want to, I'll listen." He played, just a few notes, but they wrapped around the house like warmth. Hazel heard it through the window. Her tiny hand clutched the pillow tighter, and she smiled. It began with a crayon and a moment of stillness. Hazel had taken to sitting under the apple tree for hours each day, sketching with quiet determination. On this particular afternoon, the sun had cast a golden sheen through the canopy, painting the grass in honeyed hues. Mara watched from the porch as Hazel hunched over her sketchbook, tongue peeking slightly from the corner of her mouth, lost in a world only she could see. By the time Gideon walked over to check on her, she had already finished. "Want to see?" she asked, holding the sketchbook up like it contained treasure. He sat beside her in the grass and peered at the page. It was the tree, of course, but this time something was different. Beneath its wide branches sat three figures: a man with a guitar, a woman with a soft gaze and basket of apples, and a girl in a wheelchair holding a harmonica. The proportions were imperfect, the lines a little uneven, but the feeling was unmistakable. Warmth, belonging, home. "That's us," Gideon whispered. Hazel nodded. "I wanted to draw how it feels." Later that evening, he showed the drawing to Mara. She stared at it for a long time, her lips parting, then curling into a soft smile. "She got it," she said. "She captured it." The next morning, Gideon tucked the drawing into his truck and drove into town under the pretense of picking up feed. But he made a detour to the general store where a local corkboard stood behind the register, cluttered with handwritten ads and lost pet notices. "Mind if I put something up?" Gideon asked old Mr. Harris behind the counter. "So long as it ain't political," Gideon chuckled. "It's just art, from a little girl with a big heart." He pinned it there, unsigned, and left. Didn't think much more of it, but by the following weekend, things began to shift. A woman in her 50s came by the farmhouse holding a letter and blinking through tears. "I hope this isn't strange," she said to Mara. "I saw a drawing in town. It looked like my family used to before my husband passed. I just wanted to say thank you." Then came a teenage boy who said the picture had made him call his estranged dad. Then a schoolteacher. Then a pastor. People began stopping by, drawn to the farmhouse by something they couldn't quite explain. They didn't come to gawk. They came to talk, to share, to say the drawing reminded them of something good. Hazel didn't understand at first why everyone cared so much. "I only drew what I felt," she said. But Gideon knew. Her drawing had cracked something open in people, reminded them of the family they had, or the one they lost, or the one they still hoped for. He built a small display on the side of the shed and titled it Hazel's Wall. He pinned her original sketch in the center, and soon notes and letters from townsfolk joined it. Some shared memories, some expressed gratitude. All of them carried the same heartbeat. Someone had seen them. "You've turned her into a local legend," Mara teased one evening. Gideon shook his head. "I just hung the drawing. She did the rest." That night, under a starlit sky, the three of them sat beneath the tree. Hazel's harmonica lay on her lap. Gideon strummed his guitar. Mara hummed quietly. No words were exchanged. None needed. The apple tree swayed gently above them, its branches whispering old secrets and new songs. And Hazel, the quiet girl in the chair, had become the girl who drew a town back to life. A week had passed since Hazel's drawing had found its way to the corkboard in the general store, and the stream of strangers visiting their porch hadn't slowed. Gideon tried not to count them, but he remembered their faces: the war veteran, who carried a photo of his late wife, the baker, who left them cinnamon bread with a note, and the teenager who cried without saying a word. Each visitor left something behind: a story, a memory, a moment reclaimed. It was a quiet Saturday morning. When the letter arrived, Mara found it in the mailbox nestled between a seed catalog and a reminder to renew their truck registration. It was handwritten on thick cream paper. No return address. Just Gideon's name on the front in soft, deliberate script. She brought it inside, setting it beside his coffee mug. "What's this?" he asked. She shrugged. "Looks like you've got a secret admirer." He opened it slowly, unfolding the letter with the same care he used when handling Hazel's drawings. "Dear Mr. Blake, my name is Ellen Harwood. I run a nonprofit arts program in St. Louis for children with disabilities. Recently, a friend of mine visited Haven Ridge and took a photo of a drawing posted in a general store. It showed a man, a woman, and a girl beneath an apple tree. I don't know who the artist is, but the drawing stopped us in our tracks. It had soul. It had truth. We'd like to formally invite the artist, if they're willing, to contribute their work to our upcoming exhibit, Unseen Strength. Please, let us know. We believe her voice belongs in the world. With gratitude, Ellen Harwood." Gideon read the letter aloud. Hazel and Mara sat at the table across from him, silent as the words soaked in. "They want her drawing?" Hazel whispered. Gideon nodded slowly. "They want you, sweetheart," Hazel blinked. "But I'm not famous." Mara reached over and touched her daughter's hand. "You don't have to be famous. You just have to be honest. And you are." Gideon stood and walked to the drawer where he kept stamps and envelopes. He pulled one out and handed it to Hazel. "You want to say yes?" She nodded. "Can I send more than one drawing?" Gideon smiled. "You can send your whole world if you want." They mailed the reply that afternoon. Hazel included 3 drawings. The original one under the tree, one of the porch at sunset, and a new piece, a self-portrait, drawn with confidence, crayon in hand, harmonica in lap, beneath a bright sky. A week later, the confirmation came. Ellen had selected all 3 for the exhibit. She also offered to sponsor Hazel's art supplies and invited her to speak briefly at the gallery's youth event. "Speak?" Hazel asked, panic in her voice. "Only if you want to," Mara assured her. Hazel hesitated, then looked up. "Do you think people would want to hear me?" Gideon bent to her level. "I think the world needs to." In the days that followed, something in Hazel changed. She drew more. She hummed often. Her sketchbook rarely left her side. Mara made sandwiches for the trip. Gideon tuned up the truck. And every night they sat under the tree, playing music and dreaming aloud. On the morning of their departure, Hazel wore her sunflower cuff jeans and a crisp white blouse. Her sketchbook rested on her lap like a treasure map. As they pulled out of the driveway, Gideon glanced in the rear-view mirror. The apple tree swayed gently, sunlight dappling its branches. "It's waving goodbye," Hazel whispered. Mara reached over and held Gideon's hand. "Not goodbye," he said. "Just see you soon." The trip to St. Louis began with clouds but no rain, just a pale sky that seemed to hold its breath. The truck rumbled steadily along the highway, its windows rolled halfway down to let the breeze tousle Hazel's hair. In the back seat, she clutched her sketchbook and the harmonica in her lap, her fingers resting gently on both as if afraid they might vanish. Mara rode up front, her eyes flicking often to the rearview mirror, watching her daughter like she was trying to memorize this version of her. Confident, hopeful, still shy, but blooming. Gideon drove with his usual quiet determination, but he had shaved that morning and wore the navy jacket Leia had once picked out for him. When Mara complimented it, he'd only said, "Figured it ought to meet the city, too." The exhibit hall was grander than Hazel had imagined. Tall glass windows, soft lighting, and walls covered in art made by children from across the country. Photographs, paintings, collages, and drawings. Some were polished, others messy, but all of them felt like someone's truth pinned to the world. They were ushered into a side room where Hazel's drawings had been framed and mounted. The first was the apple tree piece. The second was the porch at sunset. The third, the self-portrait, was placed at the center with a small gold plaque. Hazel Lindley, age 8. Mara gasped softly. Gideon stood still, one hand on Hazel's shoulder. Hazel stared for a long time, her mouth slightly open. "Is it okay?" she asked finally. "It's beautiful," Mara said. "You're beautiful." That afternoon, Ellen Harwood came to meet them. A woman in her 60s with silver curls and reading glasses on a beaded chain, she knelt before Hazel and smiled warmly. "You've got something rare, Hazel," she said. "You see things people miss." Hazel blinked. "I just draw what feels true." "That's exactly what I mean." Ellen introduced them to a few other young artists, some in wheelchairs, some using communication devices, some with stories etched into their eyes. Hazel didn't say much, but she listened. And they seemed to listen back, even in silence. Later came the youth event. Gideon wheeled Hazel to the side of the stage, where other children had already shared their poems or stories. Some stammered, some whispered, some cried, but each was met with claps that felt like hugs. When it was Hazel's turn, she looked up at Gideon. "Will you come with me?" "I'll get you there," he said. "But the words, those are yours." He wheeled her to the microphone and stepped back. The audience hushed. Hazel's voice, though soft, traveled. "Hi, I'm Hazel. I'm 8. I live in Haven Ridge. It's small, but there's this big apple tree, and a porch, and a chair that doesn't feel empty anymore." A chuckle rippled through the room. "I draw because sometimes my mouth doesn't say what my heart wants to. But drawing lets my heart whisper." She paused, then held up her harmonica. "And music, too. Sometimes I play how I feel. This is one of those times." She brought the harmonica to her lips and played the melody Gideon had helped her write. It wavered, grew steadier, then soared, simple, true, brave. When she finished, no one clapped right away. There was a stillness, a collective inhale. Then the room erupted, not in noise, but in warmth. Applause, tears, even a standing ovation. Backstage, Mara wiped her eyes and whispered, "She didn't just speak, she sang." Gideon nodded, overcome. And they heard her. Later that night in their hotel room, Hazel curled up with her sketchbook. "Do you think I was good?" she asked. "You were real," Gideon replied. "And that's more than good. That's everything." Outside, the stars blinked over a city that now knew Hazel Lindley's name. And back home, the apple tree waited, not just for her return, but for the stories she would bring back. They returned home late, the porch light already casting its familiar golden glow across the steps. The air in Haven Ridge felt different now, less like something they were returning to, and more like something they had become part of. Gideon carried Hazel inside, her arms looped lazily around his neck, her cheek resting against his shoulder. She was nearly asleep, the whirlwind of the exhibit and her quiet speech finally catching up with her. Mara opened the door and stepped aside to let them in. She didn't say anything, just watched them cross the threshold. Her hand lingered on the doorknob for a moment longer, as though making sure that door stayed open, not just physically, but in her life. Once Hazel was tucked in and the lights dimmed, Mara and Gideon sat in the kitchen, 2 mugs of tea between them. Outside, the apple tree stood bathed in moonlight, casting long shadows across the grass. "She was amazing," Mara said finally. Gideon nodded. "She's growing into something incredible. And she's doing it here." Mara looked down into her mug. "I used to think I was just passing through, that no place would ever really want us for long." "You're not passing through," Gideon said quietly. "You're home." She looked up at him. In the quiet of the farmhouse, with Hazel's soft breathing in the other room and the hum of the night all around them, the words felt heavier than a declaration. They felt like a vow. The next morning, Hazel wheeled herself onto the porch before breakfast, sketchbook in hand. She looked up at the tree, its leaves rustling softly. "Think the tree missed us?" she asked. Gideon smiled. "It told me it, counted every day." She giggled and began to draw. The porch, the tree, a chair, and 3 figures, smiling, unposed, whole. Later that day, as they worked in the garden, Hazel's harmonica rested in her lap, and she played a few soft notes between breaks. Mara planted marigolds. Gideon laid mulch around the roses. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't grand, but it was good, so deeply, achingly good. That evening, they sat under the apple tree, the stars beginning to prick the sky. Hazel, curled in her chair, whispered, "Can we stay here forever?" Mara looked at Gideon. He looked at her. And together, they nodded. "We'll keep the porch light on," Gideon said, "as long as you need it." And from that moment on, the porch light never went out. The next few weeks unfolded like a watercolor, each day blending into the next with gentle clarity. The strokes, sometimes bold, sometimes faint, but always intentional. Hazel's sketchbook became the epicenter of their days. What had started as quiet drawings now bloomed into storytelling without words. She sketched their morning routines, Mara's hands tangled in dish soap bubbles, Gideon crouched over soil, planting herbs. She drew the porch during a sunset, the tree in spring bloom, her own wheelchair tracks curving like a soft signature through the yard. Every drawing captured more than just scenes. It captured moments. One rainy afternoon, Mara walked into the living room to find Hazel with her sketchbook open, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was drawing something different this time. Not the tree, not the house, but a new figure, a baby, cradled in Mara's arms. Mara knelt beside her. "What's that, sweetheart?" Hazel didn't look up. "It's what's next." Mara's breath caught. "Why do you think that?" Hazel paused, finally lifting her eyes. "Because I feel it. Like the tree felt us coming back. There's something else. Someone else." Mara brushed a hand across Hazel's curls, her heart caught between hope and disbelief. They hadn't spoken of the future like that. Not yet. That night, after Hazel had gone to bed, Mara sat on the porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Gideon joined her with a quiet sigh, handing over a mug of cider. She drew. "A baby," Mara said softly. He stilled. "Did she?" She said, "It's what's next." Gideon leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And what do you think?" Mara took a long sip before answering. I think I want to believe her." Silence settled between them, warm and full. Then Gideon said, "When you showed up at the market that day, I thought I was just making room for 2 people who needed a place to rest. And now? Now I think Maybe I was making room for my future. The next morning, Mara took a test. The result came fast, unambiguous, and overwhelming in its simplicity. Positive. She didn't cry. She laughed. And then she ran. Ran. Barefoot across the porch and into the yard where Hazel sat beneath the tree, sketching. "Hazel!" she called. Hazel looked up, curious. "Yeah, Mom? You were right." Hazel blinked. "About what?" Mara reached her, kneeling beside her daughter's chair. "There is a baby coming." Hazel's eyes widened. Then she beamed, radiant. "Told you the tree knew." Gideon watched from the porch, a slow smile spreading across his face as the wind stirred the leaves. Later that day, Hazel added a new page to her sketchbook. A family under the apple tree, a man with a guitar, a woman with a soft round belly, a girl in a wheelchair, and a tiny bundle in her arms. The sketchbook didn't just speak louder than words. It said everything they hadn't dared hope aloud. Hazel was the one who first said it. "We should throw a party," she declared over oatmeal one morning. Spoon paused in midair, her face lit up with the kind of certainty only children possessed. Mara raised an eyebrow, amused. "A party?" "For the tree," Hazel said, as if it were obvious. "It bloomed again. It deserves a thank you." Gideon chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Well, I suppose when a tree goes through that much with us, it earns some recognition." And just like that, plans were set in motion. The first ever Apple Tree Thank You Festival became the talk of the town, not because it was grand, or because people expected it to be anything more than a sweet family moment, but because in Haven Ridge, stories spread like sunlight, and Gideon's porch had become part of everyone's orbit. Hazel designed hand-drawn invitations with tiny apples and ribbons. Mara baked 4 pies, each one with different spices she wanted to test. Gideon fixed the swing under the tree again and cleared the orchard path, hammering small wooden signs that read, "Hope This Way," and "Music Ahead." On Saturday, the guests began arriving slowly, bringing with them laughter, lemonade, and instruments. Someone brought a banjo, another a tambourine. Even old Mrs. Weaver, who hadn't left her house in a year, came rolling down the path with her walker and a pie balanced on her lap. Children ran barefoot in the grass, tying cloth ribbons to the lower branches. One boy tried to climb the tree, only to fall into a giggling heap of leaves. No one scolded. No one minded. The air was filled with music, not polished, not rehearsed, but raw and joyful. Gideon strummed his guitar, and Hazel joined in with her harmonica, crafting a sound only the two of them could make. Mara hummed along while passing out apple cider in mason jars. The sun dipped slowly into golden evening as Hazel called everyone's attention. She wheeled herself in front of the shed, where they had pinned over 40 drawings submitted by friends and neighbors. "This is the wall of thanks," she said, gesturing proudly. Everyone brought one thing they're grateful for. There were sketches of sunsets, families, bicycles, stars, but one drawing, crayon on thick cream paper, caught everyone's eye. It showed the apple tree, a wooden chair beneath it, and 3 hearts floating in the sky. Gideon stepped forward. "This is what happens when a quiet miracle gets noticed," he said. "It keeps going. It keeps growing." That night, after the guests had trickled home and the fireflies took over the field, the family sat beneath the tree in silence. The swing creaked in rhythm with the breeze. Hazel broke the stillness. "I think the tree liked it." Mara looked at her daughter, then at Gideon. "It's the first time I've seen the tree look full." "It's not just a tree anymore," Gideon said. "It's a memory, a promise, a beginning." And as the stars blinked awake in the dark sky above, the tree stood tall, blooming not just with flowers, but with the invisible fruits of love, acceptance, and stories shared beneath its branches. It was Mara who saw it first. She stepped out onto the porch that morning with a cup of tea in one hand and her robe pulled tight against the cool breeze. The sunlight was just beginning to spill over the horizon, painting the fields gold. Jiffy rubbed her eyes, not quite trusting what she saw. "Gideon!" she called, her voice part whisper, part disbelief. He emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Everything okay?" she pointed, stunned. "Look." There it was. The apple tree, once bare and grieving, was blooming. Not a single blossom the last 2 years. Not even a bud. But now, every branch was adorned with delicate pink-white flowers, shimmering, in the morning light like soft confetti. It looked like it was exhaling spring. Hazel rolled out onto the porch, her sketchbook still in hand. Her eyes widened. "It waited," she whispered. Gideon didn't speak. He just stepped down into the dewy grass, walked to the tree, and ran a hand gently along its bark. "It waited," he echoed. That morning, nothing else mattered. Breakfast was forgotten. Chores abandoned. The three of them sat beneath the blooming tree on the quilt Mara had stitched the winter before. Hazel pulled her harmonica from her lap and played a single note, a soft, hopeful sound that hung in the air. Later that day, neighbors passed by and noticed. Some stopped, some cried. Others returned with stories of their own trees, of loved ones lost and hopes buried. It wasn't long before the porch became more than a home. It became a place where people came to remember, to hope, to heal. The town took notice. A local photographer came by to document the bloom. A columnist from the Haven Ridge Gazette wrote a story titled "The Tree That Remembered." And through it all, Hazel drew. She captured the petals, the light, the feeling of the tree stretching back into life. One evening, as the sun set fire to the sky and the tree glowed in silhouette, Mara asked, "Do you think it bloomed because we came back?" Gideon thought for a long moment before answering. "I think it bloomed because we were ready to see it." Hazel smiled, her fingers idly tracing the outline of a blossom in her sketch. "Maybe it was always ready. It just needed us to believe in it again." And under that tree, surrounded by the scent of new life and old love, a family that had once felt broken realized they were whole all along. Spring stretched its arms fully across Haven Ridge. The days lengthened, the air warmed, and the scent of blooming apple blossoms became the town's new perfume. People still came, strangers and neighbors alike. Some to see the miracle tree, others simply to sit beneath it and feel something they couldn't quite name. Hazel had taken to sitting under the tree most mornings with her sketchbook. She called it her thinking spot. She drew the bloom from every angle, capturing how the light hit the petals at different times of day, how shadows danced when the wind rustled the branches. One day, Gideon found her especially focused. "What's today's masterpiece?" "Here," asked, kneeling beside her. She turned the pad. "It's not just the tree this time," she said. "It's us, under it, all of us." Sure enough, the drawing showed the three of them sitting beneath the tree. Hazel in her chair, Mara reading a book, Gideon playing his guitar. Around them, the petals swirled like a celebration. Gideon's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Mara stepped outside with a tray of lemonade. "Show me?" Hazel held up the page. Mara's smile faltered as emotion overtook her. It's more than beautiful. It's who we are now. That evening, they made a decision. Not with big speeches or declarations, just a quiet agreement, spoken in glances and shared tasks. Gideon moved Mara's suitcase from the guest room to the master. Mara hung a set of wind chimes by the kitchen window. Hazel rearranged the fridge magnets into the word home. They were no longer guests or hosts. They were a family. The next day, Gideon surprised them both. He unveiled a wooden sign he'd carved and sanded himself. In simple letters, it read, "The Porch Tree, where things begin again." He planted it beneath the tree while Hazel watched, her hand on Mara's. "It's perfect," Hazel said. They held a quiet dinner to celebrate, just the three of them, plates full of apple pie and roasted vegetables, laughter mingling with the scent of spring air drifting through the open windows. Later, that night, Hazel asked Gideon, "Do you think this is forever?" He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I think forever starts with moments like this." Hazel nodded, content. "Then let's keep having them." And with the apple blossoms glowing faintly in the moonlight outside, that promise settled deep into the soil of their lives. Summer's arrival in Haven Ridge wasn't announced by calendars, but by the way children's laughter rolled through the fields, how the evenings lingered, golden and forgiving. The apple tree stood tall, its leaves now fully unfurled, shading, more than grass, shading lives. Hazel had begun spending afternoons there, not just to draw, but to read aloud. Her voice, still soft, carried surprising strength when wrapped in story. She read to no one and everyone. To the tree, to the breeze, to Laya, she said. Gideon never corrected her. One afternoon, Mara brought out a box of old books, Laya's favorites. She had found them in a cedar chest Gideon hadn't opened in years. "I hope it's okay," she said, setting the box down. Gideon ran his fingers over the covers. His voice caught. "It's more than okay." They began a new tradition. Story time. Sundays. Gideon would play a tune on the guitar, Hazel would read, and Mara would prepare apple tarts using a recipe she had adapted from memory. It wasn't an event, it was a rhythm. Neighbors joined in. First a boy named Caleb and his dog, then Miss Ramsey from the post office. Soon, benches began appearing under the tree, gifts from townsfolk who just happened to have an extra. One day, after a particularly spirited reading of Charlotte's Web, Hazel looked up and said, "We should build a little library." Gideon tilted his head. "A shelf?" "No," Hazel said. "A tree library. One where people take books and leave them like the apples, free and sweet." That week, he built it with her. A wooden box with a shingled roof and a tiny door. They painted it apple red and wrote in white paint, "Take a story. Leave a story." The day they placed it under the tree, people came with books, with tears, with notes tucked into pages. Mara found a romance novel from her youth. Gideon spotted a copy of a guitar manual he once taught himself from. As twilight fell, Hazel reached for Mara's hand. "We made a forever place, didn't we?" Mara knelt beside her, brushing her cheek. "We're still making it." That night, a light rain swept through Haven Ridge. They sat on the porch, watching droplets glitter on the tree leaves like dewdrop constellations. "I used to think this tree belonged to my past," Gideon said, his voice low. "But maybe it was always meant to be part of my future." Mara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The best parts of us live in what we choose to build, together. Hazel, half asleep in her chair, mumbled, "Let's build a sky next." They laughed, not at her, but in awe of her. And maybe, in that quiet joy, the tree whispered its first promise of forever. The following weeks rolled in slow and golden, the kind of summer that smells of ripe earth and second chances. Gideon found himself waking with the sun not out of habit but hope. Something quiet had taken root in the farmhouse and begun to grow. Hazel spent every morning under the apple tree, her sketchbook always open, her crayons lined up like soldiers in a tin box. Mara sat beside her with a book in one hand and the other resting on her growing belly, a silent rhythm of presence and peace. The tree, too, changed, not in the way trees bloom or wither, but in the way it felt. It was no longer just a backdrop or a keeper of grief. It had become something living again, not just with leaves, but with meaning. One Saturday, Hazel announced her latest idea. "I want to paint the tree." "You mean draw it?" Gideon asked. "No," Hazel said, matter of fact. "Paint it, with color, like celebration." So they planned a day for it. The Tree Day. Neighbors came with ladders and gentle hands. They didn't paint the bark, of course, but added tiny murals to rocks at the base. A harmonica, a guitar, an open book, a wheel that became a flower. Children dipped their hands in paint and pressed their prints along the fence like garlands of belonging. Gideon carved a new sign that read, "The Tree That Waited." Mara watched it all unfold with tears in her eyes. "We built a world," she whispered. "No," Gideon said, taking her hand. "We rebuilt one." That night, beneath the starlit sky, they hosted a porch concert. Hazel played her harmonica. Gideon strummed his guitar. Mara read a poem she'd written about roots and rain and the bravery of starting over. The town listened, not just with ears, but with hearts. Later, when everyone had gone, and silence returned like a blanket, Hazel turned to Gideon. "What if we planted another tree?" she asked. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You think this one needs a friend?" "No," Hazel said. "I think someone else might." In the hush of that moment, with stars blinking their old lullabies, Gideon nodded. "We'll find the right spot for someone else's beginning." And somewhere, far beyond the edge of their porch, light, hope stirred again. Autumn tiptoed into Haven Ridge with a painter's grace, brushing gold and amber across the orchard. The apple tree, still full and strong, stood like a quiet sentinel over the lives it had helped stitch together. Its leaves began to curl and crisp, whispering secrets to the wind that danced through its branches. Inside the farmhouse, everything had softened into rhythm. Gideon's mornings began with Jonah cooing at dawn, Mara's arms wrapped loosely around him. Hazel, now fully settled, had claimed the sunroom as her new studio. Its windows overlooked the tree, and the light that poured through them seemed tailor-made for stories. Each afternoon, Hazel held art lessons for the neighborhood children. She taught them how to draw with feeling, how to color outside lines, on purpose, how to let a picture speak without saying a word. Gideon watched them from the porch sometimes, his guitar resting across his lap. The music wasn't always for the kids. It was for what couldn't be said. Mara, belly round and spirit steady, began working on a book, a children's story inspired by Hazel's drawing. "It's not just about the tree," she said. "It's about how love grows in unexpected soil." Gideon read every draft she finished, each word blooming into something real inside him. One morning, Hazel wheeled herself out to the tree with something wrapped in a towel. Gideon followed, curious. "I've been saving this," she said, unwrapping the towel to reveal a wooden plaque. She'd burned the words in with a magnifying glass and sunlight over many days. It read, "Here we grew again." Together, they nailed it to the base of the tree. Gideon's hands were steady, Hazel's eyes wide. Mara joined them with lemonade and smiles, and Jonah, nestled in her arms, blinked up at the branches overhead, as if already memorizing the sky. That evening, they hosted one final porch concert before winter. Neighbors brought thermoses of cider, scarves wrapped loose around necks, cheeks kissed pink by the cold. Hazel opened with a harmonica solo, the tune as wistful as it was warm. Gideon played backup, while Mara read from her finished manuscript. Wartu thought this was a story about a girl who drew, she said. But it's really a story about the ones who saw her, who listened, who stayed. The applause was quiet but certain, like footsteps returning home. Later, after everyone had gone, Gideon and Mara stood beneath the tree once more. Hazel, already asleep inside, had left her sketchbook open on the porch railing. A fresh drawing showed the tree not with 3 figures beneath it, but 5. "What's this?" Gideon asked, holding the page. Mara leaned in, her smile soft. "It's the future, I think." The wind stirred, the tree rustled, and Gideon, for the first time since Leia had passed, said aloud what had long sat in his chest. "This is forever, isn't it?" Mara nodded. "Yes, and this time we get to live it." Winter rolled in on quiet wheels, frost tracing the windows and curling under doors. The farmhouse, once a haven of silence, now pulsed with laughter, soft cries, and the hum of lullabies. Jonah had settled into his rhythm, and the days flowed, like warm molasses, slow, thick with memory. Hazel sat more often under the apple tree, sketchbook in her lap, wrapped in layers of flannel and fleece. She didn't always draw. Sometimes she just listened, to the wind, to the creak of the branches, to the distant sound of Gideon's guitar through the cracked kitchen window. Mara finished her manuscript and sent it off to a small publisher in St. Louis. When the acceptance letter came, she read it out loud under the tree. Hazel clapped. Gideon kissed her cheek. Even Jonah gurgled in approval. On the day the first snowfall dusted the yard, Hazel asked if they could write a new song. "Not just music," she said. "Something about us, about everything that happened." Gideon nodded. "We'll call it The Song That Stayed." They worked on it every night, Gideon on guitar, Hazel on harmonica, Mara at the table writing down the words they didn't quite know how to say. Weeks passed. The tree shed its last leaves. The porch was strung with lights, soft golden orbs like captured stars. Hazel grew quieter again, not sad, just full, like someone carrying treasure inside. Then one evening, when the wind howled and snow whispered against the glass, they performed it. Gideon strummed the first note. Hazel followed, the harmonica weaving like a thread through a tapestry. Then Mara spoke the words, "You were a tree when I was the storm. You stayed when I fell, and you gave me form. I was a sketch, half finished and torn. You traced me in love. Now I'm fully born." The silence that followed was sacred. Hazel looked at her mom. "Did it work?" Mara nodded, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. "Yes, baby. It worked." They hung the lyrics on the wall beside Hazel's first drawing. Beneath it, they wrote, "The Song That Stayed." That night, as snow blanketed Haven Ridge and the apple tree stood watch beneath its frost-tipped crown, the farmhouse glowed from within. 3 lights, 3 hearts, 3 chairs filled. And the song? It didn't end. It lingered, looping gently through memory and promise. It stayed.